Welcome to the Imposter Monkey, where we bring you testimonies on imposter syndrome and how to overcome it. Today, I have with me Diana, the anti-macro coach, who has helped me in my health and fitness journey. Welcome.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am the anti-macro coach, which means that I actually talk against macro tracking as a health coach and a nutrition coach, which is pretty not the normal way, right? So tracking macros is very much like the high level way that you reach your goals and you achieve success. But I personally had a pretty disordered relationship with food and my body when I did track macros. But I also understand the desire to want to achieve very specific goals or to just improve your overall health. And so I provide guidance on how to do that without tracking macros, without tracking calories, and by focusing more on how to build your nutrition by focusing on portion sizes, as well as your eating behaviors and your mindset around food, and recognizing your body's natural cues that signal hunger and fullness, and really just a fully comprehensive way of looking at your health and nutrition without finding that obsessive way about doing it.
Yeah, I love that. I know that that's helped me a lot. And ever since we worked together and I learned the mindful eating, that's all I ever share to like anybody. I'm like, hey, like I simplify it by just being mindful about it. Like I've done the macros, I've done the keto, the just salads, you know, all those different ways of approaching it. But literally the mindfulness, I've been able to maintain my weight like ever since. And, you know, I feel great and I see it as like longevity. And I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you're also not one of the first clients to say that. I feel like when I get feedback from my clients, one of the most common things I hear about is people tell me that the mindful eating piece was probably the biggest transformation that they made with their eating. And that has a lot to do with their eating habits and behaviors and how they connect with food. And it really significantly transforms your relationship with food. And yet it's such a basic habit that you're like, how did I not learn this any sooner?
Yeah, I agree. Because like I look back and I'm like 10 years ago when I did start like my fitness journey, you know, not including like high school, I was like, wow, like if I could have only known this, then it would have saved me so much trouble throughout those years. But hey, better late than never. So
exactly.
Awesome. Well, today, why don't you tell us of some experiences or times that you've gone through imposter syndrome and like kind of what that's looked like?
Yeah, I've gone through that a lot in this entire process, and I can categorize it in two ways. I've gone through imposter syndrome as a health coach, but then also imposter syndrome as a business owner. And so from a health coach standpoint, I mean, health coaches right now are like the big thing, I feel like, on social media. There's so many of us, and it's so easy to get stuck in this comparison trap. And as you learn and grow as a coach, right, I'm always learning. I was just telling you that I got involved in taking another educational course this year so that I could further my knowledge as a health coach. But damn, I'm among all of these really smart, intelligent people who are way ahead of me in this course. And my mind is blown a lot of times listening to how easily they talk about topics that I'm still just wrapping my head around. And that can get really tricky because that imposter syndrome kicks in like, oh, am I a good enough coach? Like, do I understand this information well enough to be the kind of coach that I want to be? And it's so easy to get trapped into that, especially when you hear all of these coaches talking about their own knowledge on social media and you come across something that maybe I didn't know well, or something that's new to me or something that's different. And you're like, am I missing something? Like, should I have learned this? So from a nutrition coach, or even a fitness coach, I feel like it happens all the time because I'm continually learning, but there's always going to be probably gaps in my knowledge. I mean, the space itself is continually changing. There's always going to be somebody ahead of you. And it's so hard to sometimes stay in the moment and appreciate the knowledge that I've built myself and my skill sets because I'm so focused on what's next. And then from a business perspective, I mean, the same thing goes. Business coaches are now like the big thing on Instagram. And you see people flaunting how much money they've made in their business and how far they've gotten in their business. And you're grinding your gears every single day, working as hard as you can, only to feel like you haven't accomplished what they have, right? And it's once again, it's that comparison trap that you get really trapped in, or I should say that I personally get very trapped in when I find myself comparing my business to other people's businesses, when they're telling me how many clients they've gotten and how much money they've made and how many team members they've been able to hire, and me feeling like, well, damn, I just posted an Instagram that got like 10 likes. Like, what am I doing wrong? So I feel like imposter syndrome has hit not only just, in two different areas, but also multiple times in my career as a coach, for sure.
It's interesting that you say on like comparison, like as you were saying that, like it instantly triggered me of like, okay, you're at this level constantly working on yourself to better yourself. You're saying you're continuing your education, looking at like how you can improve yourself. So it's continuous, right? Mm-hmm. You're not just there stagnant and not doing much about it. So you're continually improving, but then you look at people that are ahead of you, right? And you're like, oh man, like they seem like they're way ahead of me and this and that, but you're doing so much. But then like that's two levels, right? Now it made me think of how there's probably the level of like how you feel, but like below you, right? So then someone could be like, hey, like, wow, like, she's so knowledgeable and this and that. So like, for example, like for me, like doing stuff like this is like, oh, wow, like, like that imposter syndrome kicks in because I'm like, man, like, what if it's not good? What if people don't like it? What if I get no views, or like, or someone says something bad about it, and like I always beat myself up on it too. And I'm just like, wow, then there must be those other people that feel exact same way you do, but you're ahead of them. So in a way, like you're doing great, but it's like it goes back to that comparison that you're talking about. It's just like detrimental to oneself.
Yeah. And funny enough, I've actually had friends or other people in the space express that to me about me. So, I've got people that I compare myself to, and their profiles maybe trigger me because I'm like, damn, I'm not good enough. And I've had people distinctly tell me that I am like their goals, or that I had a friend who I've made in the business space who told me that she muted my profile for a while because I was that person who triggered her, and it's amazing that we're all kind of triggering each other because we're told to exist in this space. I mean, social media marketing is really the main driver for most health coaches. And the advice that we're given as far as how to push our businesses forward is we're supposed to brag. We're supposed to celebrate wins. We're supposed to celebrate client wins, business wins, all different kinds of aspects, right? So we're constantly putting our best selves out there, and there's always going to be somebody else who's comparing themselves to you. And a lot of times as a health coach, right, you're trying to create this atmosphere, you're trying to create this authority in the space where clients are, at least, or potential clients, I should say, are looking up to you saying, wow, I want to be like her. I want the knowledge that she has. And maybe it's, for a lot of health and fitness coaches, it's like, I want the body that they have, or I want the strength that they have. And that's what drives them to hire you as a coach. So that is the kind of marketing that we're told to do. So we're just only cultivating this environment where we're all trapped in comparison traps and this aspirational thinking that's keeping us kind of stuck in that imposter syndrome a lot of time. Yeah,
it's like that constant loop. But going back to what you're saying, there's a friend or someone that who would look at your profile and be like, oh man, like I have to mute her. Like I remember seeing a lot of your stories. I'm like, wow, she's so good at like talking, and like you're able to just like flow. I'm like, wow, that's impressive. I was like, I need to learn to do that, because then sometimes I get in front of camera, I'm like, like stutter or like kind of pause. But that's really interesting to hear, like the different aspects. Like you're able to now, hindsight, actually see those two spectrums. Now, based on like comparison, like how do you go about overcoming that? Like what strategies or I guess what things do you do to overcome it?
Well, most importantly, I go to therapy.
Very important.
That was huge actually for me. So I was in therapy for like a pretty long period of time, but when I was in therapy, I was working on a lot of more personal things. And last year of business was it was a huge year of growth for me. I was really stepping into this title as the anti-macro coach. I was really finding my voice And I was really trying to figure out how I could be a better business owner and a better coach. And as a result, it really pushed me in new ways that I hadn't experienced before. And I'm going to be fully honest and frank, like my confidence tanked at one point and I just wasn't feeling confident in myself. I was getting really wrapped up in that comparison trap, in that imposter syndrome of feeling like I wasn't good enough. And I just identified, I was like, I need to get out of my own head. And I need someone to help me do that. And so I went back to therapy, and that's been instrumental. So one of the key pieces that my therapist has given me, like the key tools that I use, is really when your brain starts to go off and start telling you, oh, you're not good enough. This person's better than you. Like they're all doing better than you. I just simply say stop and ask, is this helping me? And usually the answer is no, it's not helping me. It's sending me into some kind of spiral, right? And instead I focus on either neutral statements about my business or focus on the present, or, I've done meditations, affirmations, gratitude. It really kind of depends on where I'm at from a mental state, but it's nice having a lot of different tools. And I think what also helps is you have to acknowledge that you don't really know everyone's story. So while you're out there comparing yourself to all these people who are putting up their wins, they're very frequently not sharing their losses. They're not sharing their struggles. You're not seeing the in-between. And so my Instagram looks curated, right? It looks like I've got it all figured out and I've got it together. And many people probably couldn't tell that I was going through a serious confidence dip at the end of last year. All because that's not what I'm putting out there. That's not what I'm showing. And something that I do try to do with my content is I've tried to show the uglier sides of those things. I specifically did a post about my client struggles that they were going through in the moment. So that way I could help other people who were potentially experiencing imposter syndrome themselves or experiencing that comparison trap themselves to realize it's not all butterflies and rainbows the whole way. You're gonna have to struggle a little bit. And the struggle is normal, and the struggle is ultimately what forces you to grow. If everything goes really well, you're not really growing. So it's important to remember that there's a process to it all. And I think kind of bringing yourself back down to earth and saying, okay, you know what? Everybody else has gone through this process. Everybody else has had these feelings. It helps bring reality back to a space where we're often very curated.
Yeah. So I do want to ask, when you're saying you start falling into that spiral, right? Mm-hmm. What kind of like triggers do you know it's like, oh, I'm about to go into that spiral, I should stop? Like, how do you realize that before it becomes too late, right? Because like I've been into the point where it's like comparison. I'm like, oh, like, I feel bad about this, or like it's not good enough and this and that, and it just keeps going deeper and deeper. It's like a rabbit hole, right? And then like you said, you need help sometimes to pull yourself out of there. So I try to like reach out to people to kind of get my mind out of it. But sometimes, you can't. Like, how do you just prevent yourself from getting too deep?
You have to develop self-awareness. And that's probably one of the trickier pieces. And that's definitely something that I'm learning right now, is when to identify like, okay, am I in a burnt out state, or am I feeling like emotionally at a low point? There's sometimes you can tell when your emotions are off, when things start to set you off, like really minor inconveniences start to impact you a little bit more than they should. That's a great way to do it. Or, just becoming more aware and getting familiar with, where's my mindset at right now? Am I feeling happy, or am I feeling kind of down? So for instance, last week I noted like, oh, I was feeling down. I was just not feeling like I was in a super happy place. So I just pulled back a lot of my effort last week. I intentionally took things a lot slower. I didn't push myself as hard. I gave myself a lot more grace. There was one point where I was just like, I'm not in a place to start working, so I'm just gonna go for a walk. I'm gonna go outside. I left my phone at home, so that way I wouldn't even be tempted to check it. I wouldn't be distracted, and I just went outside for a walk and reset. I've been journaling a lot more so that I can explore my feelings a lot, because when you keep them all inside, you can't interpret them a lot of times, or you get really caught up in them. And it can be truly cathartic to write it all down and then see it on paper and be like, whoa, I've got some really crazy thinking going on
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
So I think it's, in more summary, right? It's bringing self-awareness to you. It's doing regular check-ins with yourself to see, where am I emotionally? How am I interpreting things? And then also, what's my self-talk, right? You can recognize, that's probably the easiest part. You can recognize when you're saying really negative things about yourself. And that's when you kind of have to stop and go, we're not going to keep doing that. That's a ugly rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah, I love the part where you talked about journaling. So like I work on things of like, not getting into those bad mindsets. And I remember one day something triggered that thought in my mind, why don't you try journaling?
Yeah.
You're not feeling too good. And I remember picking up a pen and, just a notebook, and I'm like, I'll probably write like 2-3 sentences. And I started writing, and then it was like I was throwing up onto the journal. Like next thing you know, I had a full-on page. I'm like, I didn't even write this much in school. Like I'm over here writing out so much. But I think it's really important to like point out that, at least to bring it back to the journaling, is you kind of vent that way, right? So I think it's a good tip for whenever let's say you don't have someone, or you just need something to kind of like de-stress yourself, or try to get your mindset out of that, or out of the negative mindset, and just journaling. Like that's really cool. I did really enjoy that, so I wanted to put more emphasis into that. So that's awesome. With things that you've done to overcome imposter syndrome, how is your life after implementing those versus when you wouldn't do like these strategies to, set therapy, journaling, stuff like that? Like, what is your life like, without it versus with?
Yeah, I think I'm really still coming into that part of my life. Like I had mentioned that my confidence took a serious dip just at the end of last year. I got back into therapy at the beginning of this year. And my really big goal, I was like, if I want to be a good business owner and a good coach, I need to get my head screwed on straight. And so a big goal of mine was I really wanted to tackle my emotional well-being, my ability to regulate my emotions, and then to not let it, be driven by my business. And so I'm really still learning that right now. I'm still learning how to pull myself out of these comparison traps. But I also believe that imposter syndrome can be a little bit cyclical. Right? Like what I've realized is through the course of my career in health and fitness, I've experienced imposter syndrome at times, and then I've been on top of the world at times. And I think it's when you start to realize, so you realize that there's a disconnect. You're missing some level of information that can make you better. So hopefully you go out and you seek that information. Like I've invested in mentors and certifications, in any kind of way I can expand my knowledge where I know that I'm struggling. And I've done that over the last few years, right? So then I take the time to learn, and I take the time to implement, and then I start to feel really good. And you're like, oh, I got this now. Like I'm nailing it. And you go through that period of time where you're doing really, really well. You're on top of the world. And then that next trigger comes up, right? All of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, you've gotten this far, but now you need to get this far, right? And so now you realize, okay, there's another gap in my knowledge and my ability, and I have to close that gap. And the difference is, so you're always going to go through this cycle of imposter syndrome, probably. At least I believe so. The difference is how you handle it, right? The difference is do you let the imposter syndrome take over? Do you allow it to hold you back in moving forward? Or do you take it head on and decide, well, this imposter syndrome is telling me I need to go out and learn, particularly from somebody else who's better than you, and continually always be in that learning cycle, and using imposter syndrome more as a motivator, as a tool, as a sign that you're ready for that next level.
Oh, I really like that. It's just that continuous improvement.
Yeah. You're always probably at some point going to look ahead and say, there's someone that knows more than me.
Yeah. And it's never going to be ending, right? Someone's always going to have more than you, going to know more than you. It's just going to be life.
Just always, and there's always going to be someone making more money than you. There's always going to be someone who has more than you, unless you're Jeff Bezos. I don't know if he experiences imposter syndrome. Seriously. But I think for us regular people, we're always going to go through these cycles, and it's just part of a growth cycle.
Yeah, and then with that, I would say also, you don't, like you mentioned earlier, is you don't know everyone's story, right? Mm-hmm. So everyone's cards are dealt differently, so that plays a big part into it. Yeah, absolutely. And their experiences and what ultimately builds them into the people that they become. And you don't realize that they're having struggles with firing people off their team when you're worried about, I haven't hired anyone on my team, right?
And, it's kind of like the saying, mo money, mo problems, right? Like the further you get in business, the more clients you get, the more people you help, you're still going to find potholes along the way. You're still going to find struggles. You're still going to find friction along the way. And it just becomes a matter of, do you let that hold you back, or do you overcome it and find a way to move forward?
Love it. Very well put. So what last remarks, suggestions, tips would you give the viewers with overcoming and living with like imposter syndrome?
It would have to be, I don't believe that you can learn everything yourself. We're a very DIY community now, right? A very DIY community is not the word, but what's the word? We're
DIY times.
Yeah, DIY is the hot topic right now, right? We want to do it ourselves. We want to figure it out ourselves. We've got Google at our fingertips, YouTube, right? Even as a health coach, I'm constantly putting out information that people can ultimately use, right? But there's always going to be somebody who knows more than you. And these are the people who have walked the walk. They've been where you've been, and they know exactly how to get from point A to point B. Trust those people, right? Find people that you can invest in. Find people who can mentor you. Find courses or certifications that can help you get from one step to another. I just think that a lot of times we try to isolate ourselves and we try to focus on, well, like, let me do it myself. And if I just put a little elbow grease into it, I'll get there. And you're not wrong, right? I'm sure that you will. But why not allow somebody to elevate you to a higher level? Why not surround yourself by people who are constantly pushing you into a new direction? And why not trust somebody to guide you along the way and get you to that level a little bit faster? So I think investing in mentors has been one of probably the biggest things that I've done in my business career, my coaching career, that has been so incredibly helpful.
Thank you. Very well put. Yeah. So where can they learn more about you?
Yeah, so I am mostly on Instagram at Coach Diana Leigh, and that's Leigh. I have a podcast called the Anti-Macro Podcast. It's pretty much on all major podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, you name it.
Awesome.
Yeah, so you can find me there, follow me. My DMs are also always open, so if you have questions, just shoot me a message, and I'm always open for chatting.
And if you want to know about or learn more about mindful eating and how, it helped me and how it could help you, definitely check her out. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to anybody that is facing something similar or would gain value out of this. Thank you. Love it.